The galaxy was wide and full of ancient stars. The Council ruled over it like a throne in the sky. For thousands of years, no one dared to challenge them. Their word was law. Their command was unbreakable. Whenever they demanded tribute, the weaker races obeyed. Some gave golden minerals, others gave soldiers and knowledge, and those who tried to resist were erased from history like dust blown into the wind. When the tribute order was sent to Earth, it was not written with threats. It was written with certainty. The Council did not need to threaten, because every world already knew the cost of refusal. The message was sent across space, carried by beams of light and echoing in the heart of human leaders. It spoke in a voice calm but heavy, a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 destroyed worlds. The message said that humanity was strong, that it had grown fast, too fast for the Council to ignore. And because of this, humanity must now serve. It must give ships, soldiers, resources, and obedience. The Council demanded a tribute that would show Earth's loyalty, and in return the Council promised safety, a place in their empire and the illusion of peace. On Earth, the leaders gathered in a room deep below the surface. The atmosphere was heavy. No one spoke at first, because each person in that chamber knew the truth. They had studied history. They had seen what happened to those who gave in. Once a species bent the knee, they never stood up again. Once they paid tribute, they were slaves forever. The silence stretched long, like the pause before a storm. Some leaders thought of survival. They whispered about the strength of the Council. They said humanity was too young, too fragile. They feared that refusal would bring doom. Others spoke with fire in their voices. They said humanity had never bent the knee, not to kings, not to empires, not to tyrants. They said that to obey now would kill the human spirit, even if it saved human bodies. Far above, in orbit, the message of the Council replayed again and again. Across military networks, across private channels, ordinary people heard it too. Factory workers, soldiers, farmers, all of them listened, and all of them wondered, what would be the answer? Would humanity kneel or would it rise? The debate among leaders turned into an argument. The sound of voices filled the chamber, some angry, some desperate, some trembling. But beneath the chaos there was a strange unity. Every person there, no matter what they wanted, understood one thing. Humanity could not escape this moment. The choice made here would decide the fate of the entire species. For all time, the Council waited far away. In their shining halls built from crystal and steel, they were patient. They had seen this scene play out many times before. They had watched countless young races hesitate, struggle, and finally obey. To them, humanity was no different, just another piece to add to their endless empire. But in the chamber under Earth, the voices suddenly grew quiet, as if an invisible hand had silenced them. A single decision had been made, not by one person, not by one leader, but by humanity itself. The debate ended. The arguments faded. The answer formed in every heart, simple and unshakable. The room was silent. The stars outside were silent. The Council across the galaxy was silent as the message was prepared. No great speech was written. No long reply was crafted. The answer would not be wrapped in fear. It would not be dressed in excuses. It would be a word sharp as a blade, heavy as a mountain. The transmission was sent, crossing the darkness of space, racing toward the Council's throne. In their great hall, the counselors leaned forward, their eyes glowing with pride and arrogance. They expected submission, they expected fear, they expected the same ending they had seen 1,000 times before. But this time the silence broke with only one word, a word so short it cut like thunder, so simple it burned like fire. The answer was not yes, it was not maybe, it was not even a negotiation. The answer of humanity was one word, and that word was no. And though the Council did not yet understand it, that one word was about to shake the galaxy. That one word was about to end the age of tribute. That one word was about to show them what humanity truly was. The Council chamber was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the weight of a planet pressing down on every word. When the humans' message came through, no one expected surprise. They had ruled the galaxy for ages. They had seen every kind of submission, every kind of begging. They thought they knew what humanity would say. But when the single word appeared on their screens, the silence turned into disbelief. The word was simple, it was sharp. It was only 2 letters long. Yet it carried more weight than entire speeches. The humans had said, no, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with certainty, as if they had spoken for every man, woman, and child on Earth. The message was so short that some thought it was a mistake, a glitch, a fragment of transmission lost in the void. But when it repeated again, there was no doubt across the chamber. Alien faces twisted in confusion, some with too many eyes, some with mandibles clicking nervously, others with scaled skin trembling. They had all paid tribute once. Their ancestors had bent their knees. They had accepted the Council's chains in exchange for survival. And now they watched as humanity spat on that same chain. Fear spread like fire through dry grass because they knew what came next. No species could say no without facing destruction. It was the law of the stars. The Council had erased entire civilizations for less. Some counselors slammed their fists on the table, demanding war, demanding fleets to burn Earth into ash, but others stayed quiet, their silence louder than any threat, because deep in their minds a thought was growing. What if humanity knew something? What if they had strength hidden beyond sight? The Council leader rose, his long cloak shimmering like liquid metal, his eyes glowing with anger and doubt. His voice echoed across the chamber. Calling humans arrogant, foolish, suicidal, he promised that their word would be the end of them. But even as he spoke, there was unease in his tone, for he had seen something in the humans' reply that unsettled him. The confidence, the stillness, the absolute lack of fear. Outside the Council, news of the reply spread across the galaxy, carried by whispers, by smugglers, by secret channels. Species everywhere trembled when they heard it. The fragile ones hid in terror, afraid the Council would unleash firestorms that might scorch even their worlds. But others, the ones still carrying the memory of chains, felt something strange, a spark. A dangerous spark called hope. In the outer colonies of the Council, a miner on a frozen world replayed the human message again and again. Each time the words seemed to grow louder. In the marketplaces of distant planets, merchants muttered the word under their breath as if it was forbidden. In the prisons where rebels were kept, the word became a whisper that refused to die, but in the Council chambers, fear and anger twisted together, counselors argued. Some demanded immediate retaliation. They wanted to crush humanity before the word spread any further, but others hesitated. Humanity was young, yes, but their speed of growth was unnatural. They had advanced from fire to spaceflight in a blink compared to older races, and they had survived countless wars without breaking. Some feared that war against them might not end quickly. The leader finally raised his hand, silencing the arguments. He announced that humanity must be tested, that a fleet would be sent not to destroy but to punish. To remind them of their place, it would be swift, it would be brutal, and it would end this dangerous idea before it poisoned the galaxy. The Council agreed, though unease still lingered. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was not afraid. The word they had spoken was more than refusal. It was a promise in underground bunkers, in orbital stations, in cities lit by neon and fire. People prepared. Soldiers sharpened their blades. Pilots trained in endless simulations. Factories worked without rest. Everyone knew the Council would not stay quiet, and everyone accepted what was coming. Yet there was no panic, no begging, no collapse. Instead, there was unity. For the first time in history, all nations stood together, old borders erased, old rivalries forgotten, because they all understood one truth. Humanity had said no, and there was no turning back. The Council's fleet began its journey. Massive ships like floating mountains, armed with weapons that had erased dozens of worlds. The commanders were certain of victory. They laughed at the idea that one small world could resist them, but in the quiet of their thoughts, even they remembered the message. They remembered the way the word was delivered, and it gnawed at them like a shadow. Back in the Council chamber, the leader stood alone, staring at the stars. He whispered the word to himself, no, no, no. Each time it sounded heavier, more dangerous, more alive for the first time in centuries. He felt doubt not just of humanity, but of the Council itself. What if this single refusal was the beginning of something greater? What if the empire built on fear was beginning to crack, and across the galaxy, countless beings closed their eyes and repeated the word, soft at first, then louder, a whisper of rebellion. Humanity's defiance had already begun to spread. Like a storm building at the edge of sight, the Council had asked for obedience, and humanity had answered with no. But the true terror was not that word itself. It was the possibility that others might start to say it too. The Council chamber, once a place of pride and control, had turned into a storm of noise. Alien voices clashed with one another, some shrill, some guttural, some vibrating like the hum of broken machines. The word from humanity still burned in their minds. No. No species had ever dared to speak it so clearly, so boldly. And the weight of it unsettled the order of the galaxy. Counselors pounded their claws, fists, and appendages against the great table of crystal. They demanded action. They demanded punishment. They spoke of fleets and fire, of cities reduced to dust. Their words carried rage. But beneath the rage there was something else, something most of them could not admit aloud. It was fear. The council leader stood at the center, tall and shimmering. His voice slicing through the noise, he declared that humanity was reckless, arrogant, unworthy of survival. He shouted that their refusal was not only disobedience but rebellion. Rebellion that could spread like a disease. His words calmed some, but not all. For many of them had seen the humans' message and noticed something strange. There had been no trembling, no stutter, no pause. The humans had spoken with a certainty that no beaten species ever carried. In the darker corners of the chamber, whispers grew. Some counselors muttered about humanity's history, about the wars they had fought among themselves, about how their world had been a crucible of conflict, famine, storms. And yet they survived. Not just survived, but thrived. One counselor, an elder with eyes like silver pools, warned that humanity was not like the others. They had always refused chains, even their own chains. The chamber erupted again. Outrage met doubt, anger met fear. Some wanted to strike immediately, to send the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever seen, to erase Earth as a warning. But others argued, what if they lost? What if the humans were stronger than they appeared? The council had ruled through fear for ages, but fear now worked against them. Beyond the council's walls, the galaxy buzzed with the news. Everywhere the humans' word echoed. No. In marketplaces, merchants spoke it in hushed tones. In prisons, rebels carved it onto the walls. In mines, slaves whispered it to each other in the dark. Even among soldiers of the council fleets, the word spread. Quiet, dangerous, alive. On Earth, the human leaders watched the council's reactions through intercepted transmissions. They saw the chaos, the anger, the fear, and they understood something vital. They had struck not just the council's pride, but its very foundation. For an empire built on obedience could not endure a single clear refusal. Humanity did not waste time celebrating. They prepared. Factories thundered with the sound of production. Weapons were built. Ships reinforced. Young men and women volunteered for service, training in the skies, in the seas, and in the endless dark of space. They did not see themselves as doomed. They saw themselves as chosen. Chosen to prove that no tyrant, no matter how ancient, could own their future. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, a decision was forced after endless shouting. The leader slammed his staff of command, silencing all. He declared that a punishment fleet would be sent, not the full might of the council, but enough to crush humanity and remind the galaxy of the price of rebellion. The chamber roared in agreement, though the elder with silver eyes stayed silent, his gaze heavy with worry. The fleet was assembled, great warships bristling with weapons, engines glowing with the power of suns. Commanders boasted that the battle would be swift, that Earth would kneel or burn. They laughed at humanity's defiance. But when they returned to their private quarters, some felt unease. Why had the humans spoken with such calm? Why had they not tried to bargain, to beg, to stall for time? What did they know? On Earth, ordinary people went about their lives with unusual quiet. Children still played, workers still labored, but everyone carried the same fire in their hearts. The fire of the word they had spoken together. Even those who feared death did not regret the choice, for they knew that living in chains was worse than dying free. The council's spies sent reports back from Earth. They described a people united like never before. No riots, no collapse, no surrender, only preparation. The spies warned that the humans were dangerous, more dangerous than expected. Their warnings were ignored. The leader dismissed them as cowardice. He believed in fear, and he believed the humans would break like all the others. But as the fleet began its long journey through the stars, the whispers of rebellion grew louder. In distant colonies, in secret gatherings, in dark tunnels where the oppressed hid, the word spread. No. Humanity's defiance had already begun to infect the galaxy. Back in the chamber, the council leader stood alone, gazing at a map of the stars. His reflection flickered in the glass. He spoke the word quietly, almost to himself. No. And for the first time he felt something he had not felt in centuries: doubt. The Council believed they were about to teach humanity a lesson, but in truth it was the galaxy itself that was about to be taught. The humans had thrown a stone into still water, and the ripples were spreading, faster, wider, stronger, and as the punishment fleet thundered toward Earth, every eye in the galaxy turned to watch, some in fear, some in anger, some in hope, wondering if humanity's single word could stand against an empire of thousands of worlds, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they too could one day speak the same word. The punishment fleet cut through the void like blades of black glass, hundreds of ships, bristling with weapons, engines burning brighter than stars. Their commanders were sure of victory. They had destroyed stronger worlds than Earth. They had crushed rebellions before they could even take breath. To them, this was not war. This was routine, just another reminder to the galaxy of the Council's power. But this time was different, because the humans were waiting. When the fleet dropped from faster-than-light travel into the Sol system, their scanners swept across the planets, Mars, Jupiter's moons, the cold rocks at the edge of the system, and finally Earth itself. Blue and green, alive and defiant, the commanders smiled with cruel satisfaction. They expected fear, they expected pleas, but what came instead unsettled them. The humans did not hide. Their fleets rose from orbit like spears pointed to the sky, smaller ships compared to the massive dreadnoughts of the Council, but fast, sharp, and brimming with intent. Squadrons moved in perfect formation, every pilot, every gunner, every captain ready to fight. There was no sign of surrender, not even hesitation. The battle began with silence. Then the void erupted. Beams of light carved through the darkness. Missiles streaked like falling stars. Explosions blossomed in the void. The Council ships moved with the arrogance of giants. Their weapons unleashed storms of fire. They expected to shatter the humans in minutes, but minutes passed and the humans were still there. Earth's fleets moved like wolves circling prey, striking fast, vanishing, striking again. Small ships weaving between the massive dreadnoughts, targeting weak points, cutting supply lines, sacrificing themselves when needed but never retreating, never begging. Council commanders shouted in frustration as their mighty vessels were harried by ships far too small to matter, yet somehow impossible to kill. From orbit, human ground stations joined the fight, launching swarms of drones, firing railguns that cracked the silence of space. Even Earth itself became a weapon. Satellites turned into fire, civilian freighters used as decoys, every piece of human ingenuity bent toward one goal. Survival Council soldiers had seen resistance before, but never like this. Usually their enemies broke after the first strike, crying out, surrendering. But humanity fought with a fury that seemed endless. Every loss only made them stronger. Every ship destroyed only fueled their rage. On one Council flagship, an admiral watched the chaos with growing unease. His screens showed human ships moving in ways that seemed almost reckless, but always precise, always deadly. He realized something terrible. These humans were not fighting to delay. They were not fighting in fear. They were fighting to win. As the hours dragged on, the Council lost more ships than they had in centuries. Dreadnoughts torn apart, cruisers swallowed by fire, the humans paid in blood, but they never faltered. Pilots screamed defiance into open channels. Soldiers sang war songs as their ships burned. Humanity refused to bow. News of the battle spread beyond the system. Smugglers, spies, and traitors carried whispers across the stars. For the first time in living memory, the Council's fleet was not victorious. For the first time, the Empire of Fear was bleeding. Species everywhere listened in silence, hearts pounding. Because if humans could fight, if humans could say no, maybe they could too. On Earth, people watched the skies with dread and pride. Every explosion above their heads meant sacrifice, but also meant hope. They prayed for their sons and daughters, but they did not despair, because they knew humanity had already achieved something no other race had. They had stood against the Council, and they had not been crushed. In the Council chamber, reports arrived one after another, losses piling higher, commanders demanding reinforcements, leaders shouting in outrage and fear. The chamber boiled with panic. Their unshakable image of power was cracking. The leader slammed his staff down and roared that Earth must be destroyed. But deep in his eyes there was something else, something he could not admit: doubt. The punishment fleet had come to teach humanity obedience, but instead it was humanity teaching the galaxy a lesson written in blood and fire, that no empire, no matter how ancient, could silence a people who refused to kneel. The battle raged on, but the outcome was already clear. The Council would not win easily. Their fleets would not return unscarred, and the galaxy would not forget. Humanity had fought the giants, and humanity had endured, and as the fires of battle lit the void, a truth began to spread through every world, whispered first, then shouted. Humanity's one word was more powerful than all the Council's fleets. More dangerous than all their weapons, that word was still no. The punishment fleet limped back across the stars, broken and scarred, their great ships torn, their pride shattered. Never before had the Council lost so many vessels in a single campaign. Never before had they been forced to retreat from a young race barely known to the galaxy. The silence of their return was louder than any victory song. The council chamber filled with shadows and whispers. The leaders demanded answers. How could this have happened? How could a species so young stand against fleets that had conquered worlds for centuries? Some shouted that it was luck. Others swore that humanity must have secret allies. But a few spoke in hushed voices, saying the truth was far darker. Scholars were summoned. Spies were questioned. Archives were searched, and slowly the Council began to see what humanity truly was. They studied the history of Earth, a world full of storms, fire, ice, famine, war, every century soaked with blood and trial. They saw a species that had nearly destroyed itself many times, yet each time had risen stronger, more cunning, more relentless, unlike other races. Humanity had not grown in peace. They had grown in struggle. Their history was a forge, and suffering was the hammer. Every war that could have ended them only made them harder. Every disaster that could have broken them only taught them to endure. The Council realized with growing dread that humanity was not shaped by comfort, but by pain, and pain had made them unyielding. One elder counselor stood and spoke softly, his silver eyes reflecting the chamber's dim light. He told the others that humanity was dangerous not because of their ships or weapons, but because of their spirit. They were not afraid of loss. They were not afraid of death. They were not afraid of the chains the Council offered, for they had broken chains before, even their own. Some in the chamber laughed bitterly. They said no species could be so reckless. No people could fight without fear. But the reports from spies painted another picture. They described human soldiers who fought even when wounded, pilots who laughed over comms as their ships burned, citizens who prepared for war instead of begging for peace. Humanity carried something no other race had: a refusal to surrender, a refusal to accept fate. On Earth, the secret was no secret at all. It was their nature. Children learned it in stories. Students read it in books. Soldiers carried it in their blood. History was carved into their bones. Stories of empires that rose and fell, of tyrants who demanded obedience and were thrown down, of revolutions and rebellions. Humanity's greatest weapon was not steel or fire. It was memory. Memory of freedom. Memory of defiance. Factories thundered day and night, not because humans expected mercy, but because they knew none would come. Families stood together not in fear but in pride. The word they had spoken, no, had become more than an answer. It had become their banner, their promise, their identity. Back in the council chamber, division deepened. Some wanted to crush Earth with the full power of the Empire, to unleash planet killers and silence humanity forever. But others hesitated. They saw the danger in such a war. They feared that destroying humanity would only turn them into martyrs, a spark for rebellion that could ignite the galaxy. The silver-eyed elder warned again. He told them that the humans could not be controlled with threats, that fear would not chain them, that they were unlike any subject the council had ever ruled. But his warnings were drowned out by roars of anger. Pride blinded the mighty. They could not admit their empire trembled before a young race. Yet outside the chamber the whispers grew. The galaxy had seen the council bleed, and now they listened to the stories of Earth. They heard how humans had fought endless wars among themselves and survived, how they had faced extinction many times and endured. Other species began to wonder, if humanity could defy the council, why not them? On hidden worlds, rebels painted the word no on walls and banners. In mined slaves whispered it as a prayer. In quiet gatherings of oppressed people it became a song. The secret of humanity was no longer hidden. It was spreading like fire through dry stars. The Council realized too late that their punishment fleet had not silenced humanity. It had revealed them, revealed what they were, revealed what they carried. Humanity's true strength was not weapons. It was their refusal to kneel, their refusal to accept chains, their refusal to give in, and so the Council sat in their shining halls afraid of a word, afraid of a people who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. They stared at the stars where Earth spun in quiet defiance, and they wondered, how do you conquer a species that does not fear death? How do you break those who have been broken 1,000 times and always risen again? The answer they knew deep inside was simple: you cannot. The Council chamber was no longer the place of calm order it once had been. It had become a battlefield of words. Voices clashed like blades, some shrieking in anger, some rumbling in fear. The punishment fleet's failure hung over them like a storm cloud. Every counselor knew the truth. The humans had survived, and worse. The humans had not broken. Some counselors demanded war, total war. They wanted every ship, every weapon, every soldier thrown at Earth until nothing remained. They shouted that to hesitate was weakness, that to delay was to let rebellion spread. Their voices were loud, their faces twisted with rage, but their eyes deep down carried doubt. Others raised calmer voices, voices filled with unease. They warned that humanity was not like the others. They reminded the chamber that the fleet had not been met with fear, but with fury, that the humans had not begged for mercy, but had fought with everything they had. They whispered that a second war, a larger one, might not end quickly, that it could bleed the empire dry, the chamber split. The great table of crystal now aligned, dividing two sides: war and caution, destruction and hesitation. For the first time in centuries, the Council itself was trembling. Unity was gone, replaced by suspicion, by fear. The leader slammed his staff, demanding silence. His voice thundered through the chamber, declaring that humanity's defiance could not be tolerated. But even as he spoke, his words rang hollow. He could feel the crack forming in their empire, a crack created by a single word: no. Beyond the chamber walls, the whispers of division spread. Soldiers in barracks spoke of the humans with a strange respect. Merchants in distant colonies traded human stories like forbidden treasures. Slaves in the mines whispered the word no as if it were a prayer. The galaxy itself was listening, and the Council knew it. Humanity sent a second message. Short like the first, it carried no apology. No compromise, no plea. It said only, we are not subjects. We are equals. When the words reached the chamber, silence fell once more, heavy and suffocating. Never before had any race spoken so boldly. Not just refusing tribute, but demanding recognition. The message was simple, yet it shook the chamber more than any fleet could. Because the humans were not asking for survival, they were claiming respect. Some counselors laughed in disbelief, others hissed in rage. But there were those who lowered their heads, who remembered their own histories, the times before the Council had chained them, the times when their ancestors had been free. And in their hearts they felt a dangerous thing. They felt agreement. Across the galaxy the word spread faster than fire: equals, not subjects. The oppressed clung to those words like lifelines. Rebels carved them into walls. Slaves sang them in secret. Even some soldiers whispered them in the dark. Humanity had not just defied the Council. They had offered a vision the galaxy had long forgotten. Back on Earth, humanity did not celebrate. They worked, they built, they trained. They knew the Council would not let such words go unanswered. But they also knew something greater. They knew the galaxy was watching. Every action, every sacrifice, every refusal was no longer just for themselves. It was for every chained world, every silenced voice. Inside the Council chamber, the arguments turned bitter. Counselors accused one another of weakness, of cowardice, of betrayal. Old rivalries reawakened. Species that had once bowed together now glared at each other. Suspicion filled the air. The Council leader shouted for unity. But unity was crumbling. The elder with silver eyes rose once more, his voice quiet yet sharp. He told the chamber that humanity could not be destroyed without destroying themselves, that their defiance was not weakness but strength, and that if the Council tried to crush them, the galaxy would rise. His warning was met with laughter, but also with silence. Silence from those who feared his words might be true. Outside, rebellion simmered, small sparks in forgotten corners of the empire, sparks lit by humanity's defiance. Miners refusing quotas, slaves refusing orders, soldiers hesitating at commands. The empire's grip was loosening. Though the Council still pretended it was strong, the leader ordered preparations for total war, fleets to be gathered, armies to be trained, weapons to be primed. But even as he gave the command, he felt the weight of the word echo in his mind. Equals, not subjects, and for the first time he wondered if their empire could survive such an idea. The council was divided. The galaxy was restless and humanity stood firm, one world against thousands. Yet not bending, not begging, not breaking. Their words were a torch, lighting fires far from Earth, fires the council might never be able to extinguish. And as the fleets assembled, as the whispers grew, one truth became clear. Humanity had already changed the galaxy. Not with conquest, not with armies, but with a single refusal, and now with a simple declaration, they had turned that refusal into a vision. The council demanded obedience, but humanity had offered something greater. Equality, and the galaxy was beginning to listen. The fleets of the council gathered like storm clouds across the stars. Thousands of ships, weapons glowing with the fire of suns. Their commanders promised victory. They swore that Earth would be erased, that humanity's defiance would end in silence. Yet behind their words, in the corners of their minds, unease stirred. The memory of the punishment fleet's defeat haunted them. On Earth there was no fear, only resolve. Factories roared without rest. Cities glowed with determination. People stood shoulder to shoulder, preparing for what everyone knew was coming. Soldiers trained under harsh skies. Pilots studied the movements of the enemy fleets. Children grew up whispering the word that had shaken the galaxy. No, humanity had already accepted the truth. The council would come with all its power, and humanity would meet it. The galaxy held its breath. In distant colonies, whispers spread like wildfire. In markets and prisons, in mines and palaces, beings of every kind waited to see what would happen. Some hoped the council would crush humanity and restore the old order. Others prayed for the impossible, that Earth might stand again. Because if Earth stood, they too could rise. When the council's grand armada finally entered the Sol system, the stars themselves seemed to tremble. Wave after wave of colossal ships, their shadows blotting out the light. They came not to punish but to end. Commanders broadcast their threats across human channels, promising destruction unless Earth bowed. But no reply came. Silence was humanity's answer. Silence sharper than any word. The battle began with fire. The void lit up with beams and missiles. Earth's defense fleet surged forward. Smaller, fewer, but burning with defiance. Every ship fought as if it carried the weight of all history on its hull. Council warships rained destruction. But humans refused to fall. They darted through gaps, turned debris into weapons, sacrificed without hesitation. They fought not just for survival, but for the meaning of their word. The council pressed hard, confident in their numbers. But then they saw something terrifying. Every time a human ship was destroyed, another pushed forward fiercer than before. Every loss only seemed to harden them. Every sacrifice fed their resolve. Humanity was not fighting as a scattered race. They were fighting as one, united in purpose. Reports streamed back to the council chamber. Numbers of their own losses climbing higher, faster than expected, commanders shouting in disbelief. Counselors panicking, the leader demanded silence. But his eyes betrayed fear. The empire that had ruled for ages was bleeding again, bleeding at the hands of one world. In the void above Earth, the fight turned into chaos. Council dreadnoughts fell to swarms of smaller ships. Human soldiers boarded enemy cruisers with nothing but rifles and determination. Orbital stations sacrificed themselves to protect the planet. Even civilian vessels joined the fray, their hulls armed with makeshift weapons. Humanity turned everything they had into resistance. And then something happened that the Council had not foreseen. Across the galaxy, rebellions erupted. Inspired by the battle at Earth, slaves threw down tools. Miners rose against overseers. Soldiers hesitated to fire on those who shouted the human word. No, the Council tried to silence them, but the fires spread too quickly. One refusal had become many. One spark had become a blaze. The leader of the Council realized too late the truth. The Empire was not just fighting Earth, it was fighting the idea humanity had unleashed. An idea that no fleet, no weapon, no fear could destroy. Back on Earth, as the battle raged, humanity's leaders stood in silence. Watching the skies, they knew victory might not come. They knew destruction might fall, but even so, they felt no regret. Because their defiance had already changed the galaxy. They had already proven that fear could be broken, that the Council was not eternal. The Council armada pressed harder, but their unity began to fracture. Ships deserted, crews disobeyed. Whispers of rebellion reached even their own ranks. The empire of obedience was crumbling under the weight of a single word. And when the battle reached its breaking point, when fire and death filled the skies. The humans' message echoed across every channel, across every world, across every ear that would listen. They spoke not with arrogance, not with cruelty, but with unshakable certainty. We are not subjects. We are equals. The galaxy trembled, and then it listened. In that moment, the Council knew their age was ending, not because of fleets or weapons, but because of humanity's spirit. The humans had lit a fire that could not be extinguished. Their refusal had become the voice of countless worlds. The final clash above Earth did not end in silence. It ended in defiance. It ended with the word that had broken an empire, the word that had given hope to the hopeless, the word that had changed the stars forever. No. And as the smoke of battle drifted across the skies, the galaxy knew that the future would not belong to fear. It would belong to those brave enough to refuse it. Humanity had spoken, and the universe would never be the same.